Hello! And welcome to Two Wolves. My name's Ed.
My name's Mark, and today we're going to be talking a little bit about Russell Brand's interview with David Miliband.
I'm going to do a slightly different style.
Ed Miliband. Trews time.
Trewsers.
Today it's the turn of Labour. You know from the papers and that, Ed Miliband came round here.
As a bit of a background, what we think about how Russell Brand's been in the last year.
From my point of view, it's pretty cool to have somebody who's really, really popular, obviously in touch with an awful lot of people. A lot of people like what he says, getting into politics.
A lot of us feel that what's happened in politics is that there's these unelected, powerful elites that really control things.
Why do you think Ed Miliband's agreeing to do this? In elections, you know, I think of Gordon Brown, I think of his bigot gate. They've got a lot to lose with being a fool.
I would have thought the whole, especially this close to the election, the whole election campaign would be very carefully orchestrated by a big team of PR gurus. Now, maybe they're just off camera. Maybe, do you know what I mean? Maybe it is a bit orchestrated, but it's certainly an opportunity for a cock-up.
Me, and for a lot of people that don't vote, that's where that frustration emanates from. It certainly isn't apathy, Ed.
He's got a nice kitchen, hasn't he?
And since then, since suffrage, since the right of women to vote, what has meaningfully occurred?
That's totally wrong.
That's the first thing he said. And I quite like that. The first thing
You're wrong.
Ed Miliband said was, no, you're wrong. Because a lot of people, Russell Brand, he's sort of... With the Paxman thing, it's like people don't always know what to say to him. And maybe that's the right thing to say. You're wrong. Here's why. Yeah,
We'll find out
like
why.
Workers' rights, a national health service, a minimum wage. The problem I had with some of the things that you said is you've implied that the first is like there's no change happens. It's just like wrong.
I get what Russell's saying about no change. You know, Ed Miliband states the massive change that have happened, like the NHS.
Yeah.
You know, right for women to vote, gay marriage. But if you look at the problem with the corporations, ever since like the 60s, how they sort of swept through, since then, that's a huge problem. That's getting worse. So I don't really understand how he can...
I think all the things he's saying as well, it's like, you know, the right to vote, the NHS, this is very old stuff now. All of that stuff happened within quite a short space of time. And then since then, we've had, you know, Equal Pay Act, we've had gay marriage, but there hasn't been a huge amount of positive politics going on. And there's been lots of things that are very sort of not positive, like cutting the tax rates and allowing corporations to do whatever they want.
Could we see bankers going to prison for like some of the rate rigging, the Libor scandal?
Of course, if there's fraud committed by bankers, there's a bigger issue than that, which is how you have a banking system that works for your ordinary small businesses.
Major issue that people have with banks is the stuff he's saying, let's not talk about
Yeah. I mean,
the main issue is the ridiculous amount of money they've made.
Back before everything went absolutely bad, banks were split into the investment part and the savings part, you know, so they were kept separate. And when we're talking about bankers and their bonuses, we're talking about investment bankers. And I think all that stuff about small businesses getting a loan, that's your high street bank.
Yeah.
That's, you know, even if it's Barclays, they're different bits. What they did is, before the crash, they merged. So the huge amounts of losses that investment banks are basically gambling. So all those losses could be backed up by people's savings. That's where the problem came from.
You know, we want energy companies that are successful, but we also need energy companies that aren't ripping people off and are giving people a fair deal.
Why not have a public system? Like, I mean, what do they have to do to be successful? They have to get the energy from abroad or from our own power stations or whatever and give it to people. Which bit of that do you have to be successful in?
We want to confront the tax avoiders. We want to make sure that people don't avoid their taxes. You know, the non-doms.
If you're playing bingo at home, non-doms, cross it off.
It shouldn't be sort of one rule for the richest and most powerful, another rule for everybody else. It's one rule for everybody. And that's the sort of society I believe in.
He could really get him here. Do you know what I mean? By actually talking about some of the policies that Labour have. They are right of centre party. They're not going far enough. And how can he justify that?
Right, he hasn't sort of said, look, here's your policy. How does that match up with what you're saying now? Because if I didn't know what their policies were and I was listening to Ed Miliband talk, I'd be thinking, oh, right, they're way out on the left. They're going to be like distributing across society, making it much fairer. I wouldn't know they're the ones who were capping benefits.
This feeling, which I suppose Nigel Farage capitalises on, of like ordinary people aren't. It doesn't seem like there's a real choice.
I really wish you would just say, Nigel Farage, what a joke.
That's David Cameron's line there.
That's David Cameron's line, but I think they all think Nigel Farage, what a joke. I just want someone to come out and say it.
We'll said it.
Do they take him seriously, like the other politicians?
Wow. I mean, they kind of have to, right? 13% in the polls. You know, can the public be wrong?
Yes.
It's about how do you make practical change happen, practical change that people can believe in.
Has anyone up to any election ever not used the word change?
Well, it's the thing, isn't it? Vote for us and we'll make change. But when it's come to things like electoral reform, you know, changing for proportional representation, or basically anything that isn't first past the post, all the main parties are like, no. That
is the biggest single...
such a massive bit of change, because then it would allow everybody to have a vote that mattered. For
To
good or
change
bad,
everything.
I mean, who knows what would happen? There might be loads of UKIP MPs, which, you know, I don't think will be a good thing, obviously, but it would certainly be a change.
It would certainly be a change.
0 hours contracts, you probably know about 0 hours contracts, is a text message at 6 a.m. in the morning to tell you whether you got work or not.
He seems to know what a 0 hours contract is.
Right.
Whereas the Conservatives described it as, it shouldn't be called 0 hours, it should be called a flexible contract.
Right.
They seem to think that...
So they seem to think the employee has the flexibility.
They're either
it's
clueless or they're completely disingenuous.
Is that a good way to run a country? That's where we made progress on workers' rights, but we've sort of gone backwards.
Yeah.
The NHS, opportunities for young people. This isn't like bread and butter of politics.
They still want to privatise with Labour. And he's saying the NHS are going backwards. He's using that as an example that the NHS isn't going to go backwards under them. But, you know, their policy doesn't fit that. I think it's too easy for him just to talk about the Labour values, like where they traditionally come from.
What do we care about? NHS, young people, but what are you going to do?
Sort of average UK worker pays 20% normal like tax, right?
Sure.
Amazon paid 0.05%
got to deal
on
with
4
that.
billion sales.
Yeah, we've got to
Do
deal
we
with
have
that.
the power
Yeah.
to do?
Have you got the power? Yeah.
Yeah.
But he
Fine,
doesn't.
Good.
How?
Well, first of all, you've got to do it internationally.
That's his solution. When he gets elected, he's going to try and get elected for the world president. Numero uno. That's his strategy. Deal with it internationally. Brilliant.
If Rupert Murdoch has this kind of power, this kind of media voice,
We said in our manifesto you've got to look at these issues of media ownership and all that.
New Labour were really in there with Murdoch. He
God,
had this party every year, and all of the New Labour people and Tories were going to it.
Well, that still happens, right?
And they're still going to it. So
He's going to look at that, though.
he's going to look at that.
Yeah.
I don't get why they don't just say, we as a party are against hobnobbing Murdoch or whoever. You know, go and talk to journalists and stuff, but don't be effectively paid by journalists, wined and dined by them.
Other biscuits are available apart from hobnobs.
So media ownership really matters. It's something I care about. As I say, we've set out in our manifesto that we're going to definitely look at the issue. But
are you able to make proper pledges or not? Because it's too
well, I'm not making
edgy.
a pledge in that. No, it's not about edgy.
It's a very tentative, are you going to make some pledges? Why not say, what are you going to do? Tell us what you're going to do, because until you've actually told us we're going to do this, this and this, it's just talk.
I mean, we all got excited about Tony Blair. We all got excited about Barack Obama.
Do you vote for Obama? I didn't.
No, I didn't.
Change is hard, right?
Yes.
Change takes time, and I'm not being a civil servant. I'm just saying that that's the reality.
Having a go at civil servants. Lost that vote.
Secondly, change happens not in a kind of,
Good point.
Brilliant.
and it takes effort, and it takes people to demand the change to happen. So I'm not looking for euphoria.
Ed Miliband's in.
All right.
Fundamental problem with this country is that people think it's run for somebody else, and the somebody else is probably somebody right at the top.
That is exactly it.
At this point in the interview, they're basically on the same side,
Yeah.
and Russell's stopped asking questions.
But he's grown on you a bit, though, hasn't he, Miliband?
Yeah, he has, yeah.
So he's done the opposite for me. The fact he's coming across so well, and the fact that the policies that we talked about before aren't matching up.
Take two other big issues this year: climate change and international development.
First time I've heard a major party politician talk about climate change this election.
It's criminal. Absolutely criminal.
But they haven't mentioned it.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Well, not that he mentioned it.
I was like,
But what?
climate change is criminal.
Get rid of that. Doesn't exist.
The more I've learned about politics, the more I realise that what you want is galvanised people that have a voice and that feel like their voice can be heard, whether it's in housing campaigns, living wage campaigns, as you have mentioned, breaking down of powerful institutions.
I think the reason why this vote's so important is if the Conservatives get in, it's almost like none of that stuff's going to matter because they're going to kick people out of their homes. They're not going to give people a living wage. People's living standards at the bottom of society is going to go down, even if we all get up and protest, because Conservatives just won't listen.
Yeah.
So what we need is this combination of people doing that still and a government who listens.
Yeah.
I kind of agree with not everything Miliband's saying, but I kind of agree with that general point that it's this sort of two-part thing where you need, the people to express what issues are important to them and what they want done about it. And, frankly, we've done that about climate change and, gay rights and all that sort of stuff. And you need politicians who are listening to that, who are receptive to that and don't basically just shut the door and say, oh, right, there's people demonstrating outside. Send the police in, send in the hounds,
And I think it's cool what you say about it not being the election's the beginning, not the end.
Exactly.
And that it's not about euphoria, it's about stability and a sort of a dialogue with the British people where they're heard over the interests of the powerful. Then I think what we've got is something worth voting for.
Thank you.
Do you think that's a victory for Labour in that regard?
Well, whenever you've got an interview with two people opposed and then one of them moves over to the other one's side, kind of like whatever they've said, you get the feeling they've come off well because they've convinced the other person. So from that point of view,
there's loads of things I could moan about, but what's important is this bloke will be in Parliament and I think this bloke will listen to us. So on May the 7th, vote Labour. On May the 8th, more democracy, more power.
Do you think the Greens are going to be annoyed with that style? Because he's done a lot of stuff with the Greens. Caroline Lucas and Natalie Bennett, they've been on the Trews before. They've had, they've seen him at protests and things. Do you think they'll be a bit annoyed that he may have, he just told everyone to vote Labour?
What the Greens want is people to vote and vote for issues they find are important. And there are issues that overlap between the Greens manifesto and Labour. I think the difference between them is that the Greens do it properly and Labour just do it a bit half-heartedly. But I think if you were an honest Green would say, well, better that people vote for Labour than not voting at all. At least they're expressing a preference.
And Russell Brand, how do you think he's come off the back of this? Do you think he'll lose some supporters now he's essentially got... I mean, I could see the criticism labelled at him, like, why didn't you do this research a year ago and tell us, why didn't you interview the politicians then and then
or
say...
just before people had to register to vote. I mean, that's the real daft thing about this. It's like... It's like he's suddenly decided to get into politics too late for people who haven't registered to vote.
Yeah. Well, no, he's been in politics, but he's changed his view on voting right at the kind of...
It didn't take long, did it?
No, he just met the wrong guy. Should have seen it earlier on. So there's some of our thoughts on Russell Brand and Ed Miliband. There's some more videos and comments on our blog at 2wolves.
Thanks for watching.